Shut them up, now. They are so loud. I was happily living with my husband and my sweet mother-in-law, but things changed after our daughter was born. Our daughter cried at night, and I started getting yelled at and treated coldly. One day, while my husband was swamped with work at home, our suddenly crying daughter went silent in just the brief moment I looked away. But she wasn't just sleeping. She woke up convulsing. After taking her to the emergency room and hearing the doctor's diagnosis, I decided to get a divorce. My name is Michelle Stevens. I'm a 28-year-old stay-at-home mom. I live with my husband, John, our daughter, Emily, and my mother-in-law, making it a family of 4. I met John 6 years ago at my former job. We were hired at the same time and worked in the same department. From the beginning, I was impressed with his innovative ideas, which didn't seem like they came from someone who started at the same time as me. I was curious about what kind of person he was. He was different from our colleagues. He seemed a bit odd and kept to himself. But when I approached him, I realized he was an interesting guy, though a bit unique. For example, because he loves his job and constantly thinks of new ideas, he has a routine meal plan to avoid deciding what to eat for lunch. It's like, Monday is curry, Tuesday is ramen, Wednesday is grilled fish, and so on. So it wasn't that he didn't like spending time with colleagues, but he ate alone to stick to his routine. All I had to do was adjust my lunch schedule to his, and spending time with him became easy. Though we often talked about work when we were together, I learned a lot, and I enjoyed our conversations. He had some other quirks because he's so dedicated to his job, but I found them endearing. I was the one who confessed my feelings and said, "Let's date." He laughed and replied, "I was gonna ask you out soon." Our relationship didn't change much after we started dating. We didn't go on typical romantic dates. Instead, we often ate lunch together and discussed our work projects. However, for the first time since we began dating, he introduced me to his mother. He didn't like spending time on household chores because it took away from his work, so he lived with his mother. From what I heard, his family background was complicated. His parents divorced when he was 10. John stayed with his mother, and his younger sister, who was just a baby, went with their father. He hadn't had any contact with his father or sister since then. I was bracing myself for a very protective mother, but when I met her, she was a wonderful person. Unlike the reserved John, she was talkative and cheerful. She treated me just as warmly as she did her son. Sometimes when John was too busy with work, she and I would go out together. I got along really well with both John and his mother. 3 years into our relationship, after John proposed, his mother jokingly said, "If John's getting married, I guess I should move out." To which I eagerly replied, "I'd be upset if you did. Living with you is one of the reasons I said yes to the proposal. If you're okay with it, please stay with us." She laughed and said, "You sure about that? I might be hard on you." I laughed it off, saying, "Bring it on." John, watching us, laughed too. For the next 2 years, we lived together without any problems. She took care of all the household chores for John and me, who were both working. Even when I offered to help, she would say, "You must be tired, let me handle it," and she'd do everything herself. Occasionally, on weekends when John was busy working from home, she and I would cook or bake together, which was always fun. John remained dedicated to his job even after we got married. I believe our home was cheerful thanks to his mother, and I was grateful for that. Things started to change when I discovered I was pregnant. 2 years into our marriage, I felt unwell, and at the advice of John's mother, I went to a doctor, who confirmed my pregnancy. John was thrilled when I told him, but his mother's reaction was lukewarm. Considering how she always rejoiced in our happy moments more than we did, I sensed something was amiss. That night, in our bedroom, I asked John about it. He explained, Mom, she had postpartum depression after my sister was born. Dad was working in a different city at the time, so she had to take care of both of us by herself. It must have been tough. One day, she left the house with just me. I haven't seen my sister or dad since then. I regretted being so thoughtless and hurting her feelings. I didn't know there was such a backstory. If I'd known, I would have told John first and thought more about how to break the news to her. Seeing my disappointment, John smiled and said, "It's been almost 20 years since then. She'll be fine." Just as my husband said, my mother-in-law didn't change a bit from the next day onward. If anything, she became even more concerned about my health, preparing meals with even more attention to ensure I was getting all the necessary nutrients, and accompanying me to the hospital in my husband's place among many other things. Feeling reassured by her, I decided to give birth here instead of going back to my parents' house. Initially, I had thought about having the baby at my parents' house, but it was in the countryside and quite far away, so the idea of looking for a hospital there and preparing to go back seemed like too much of a hassle. Luckily, my mother-in-law said, "I'll help you out," and I was able to give birth safely. I think I will never forget the moment my daughter, Emily, was born. She had already been precious to me while in my belly, but the moment I saw her face for the first time, I felt an overwhelming surge of affection and could unconditionally vow to protect her no matter what, and make her happy. Both my husband and my mother-in-law were happy about Emily's birth, and I think that was the happiest time of my life. However, that happiness gradually started to crumble. After bringing Emily home from the hospital, I took a year-long maternity leave, thinking that I would help with childcare and household chores. But my mother-in-law said, "I've always taken care of the house, and that's not going to change. You don't need to worry about it." True to her word, she took care of various things around the house as she always did, but she wouldn't get involved with Emily. I even felt an atmosphere as if she was deliberately avoiding her. My mother-in-law, who always listened attentively to what I had to say, would give vague responses or pretend not to hear when the topic of Emily came up. I was saddened by my mother-in-law's behavior, which seemed like she was ignoring my daughter, but I couldn't speak up strongly because I knew about her past. Even after 6 months since Emily was born, my mother-in-law remained the same. By this time, Emily could perfectly distinguish between people's faces, recognizing her father, who didn't have much time to interact with her due to work, and would smile at him. My husband still prioritized work, but when he had the time, he would talk to Emily and try to communicate with her, so he was delighted that she started smiling at him. Around that time, Emily started having episodes of night crying. I haven't seen many other children, so I'm not sure, but I think Emily's night crying was on the severe side. She would cry non-stop for 2 to 3 hours in the middle of the night quite frequently. I felt sorry for my husband and my mother-in-law waking up because of it, so I tried to soothe Emily in the living room or the bathroom, as far away from the bedroom as possible. However, since our house was not that big, they could still hear her. The number of times my husband and my mother-in-law mentioned that it was loud last night had increased. Although my husband is one thing, my mother-in-law usually never complained about anything, so I think this was probably the first complaint she ever made to me. I tried my best to soothe Emily, but her night crying didn't stop. Gradually, my husband and my mother-in-law seemed to become more irritable, and their way of speaking became more and more rough, saying things like, "It's so noisy," and "Make her stop crying." At the end of that year, there was an important planning meeting at my husband's company. Whether his project idea would be accepted at this meeting would determine if he would be entrusted with a project in the next fiscal year. It was that kind of meeting. Knowing how important this meeting was, I planned to go back to my parents' house for 2 nights and 3 days starting 2 days before the meeting, so that my husband's work wouldn't be disrupted by Emily's night crying. I was being considerate in my own way. However, things didn't go as planned. In fact, I ended up going back to my parents' house even sooner. It was the weekend, less than a week before my husband's presentation, and he was working on his proposal at home. I had planned to go out so as not to disturb him, but it was raining heavily that day. Since I didn't have a driver's license, I hesitated to go out with Emily. If we went out in the heavy rain of December, Emily would surely catch a cold, that's what I thought. Reluctantly, I stayed at home, paying extra attention to not let Emily cry. However, she suddenly started crying. She had just had her milk, and her diaper was clean. I was playing with her while holding her, and I didn't understand why she started crying. Trying to keep the crying sound from reaching my husband as much as possible, I moved with Emily to the bathroom, the furthest place from the bedroom where my husband was working, and tried desperately to soothe her. But Emily wouldn't stop crying. Then, my husband opened the door of the bedroom and shouted, "It's too noisy. Make her stop crying now." This way of speaking was unthinkable from the husband I knew when we first got married, but this was pretty much what he had been like recently. I understand that work is important, but I thought he didn't have to speak in such a manner. I was so careful, and yet Emily started crying, and I got yelled at by my husband. I felt like crying myself, thinking. But I thought that once my husband gets a break from work, things would go back to normal. And my daughter Emily, she'll stop crying someday, right? So I tried desperately to hold back my tears. I had just fed her, thinking that I needed to do something, but then I decided to give Emily another bottle of milk. I thought, maybe if she's full, she might just fall asleep. Unfortunately, since I physically can't produce breast milk, I had no choice but to boil water and prepare formula. I couldn't just leave Emily in the bathroom while I made it, so I brought her to the living room and laid her down in the crib. My mother-in-law, who was there in the living room, frowned as Emily continued to cry and said, "Hey, when is she going to stop crying? John can't concentrate on his work, and I can't stand this noise anymore." Recently, my husband John and my mother-in-law have been acting like this. She helps with housework and talks to me, but when it comes to Emily, she doesn't touch her, and if she does, she just complains. That's how my mother-in-law has been lately. I apologized to my mother-in-law and asked her to watch Emily for a bit. I went to the kitchen and quickly prepared the milk. Even then, I could hear Emily's piercing cries. But by the time the water had cooled down and the milk was ready, the crying had suddenly stopped. I knew it. My mother-in-law did it. She got Emily to stop crying. I was touched. When I returned to the living room, just as I thought, Emily was asleep. My mother-in-law was sitting on the sofa, reading a book. When I thanked her, saying, "You're really something else. There's nothing like the touch of someone who has raised kids before," she responded, "I suppose," but she seemed somewhat brusque. I felt a slight discomfort with her response, but I was relieved that we weren't disturbing John, so I didn't pay it much mind. However, Emily did not wake up even after about 3 hours. If this continues, she won't be able to sleep at night and might start crying again. That's what I thought, so I decided to wake her up. But even when I called to her, Emily wouldn't open her eyes. When I tapped her lightly on the shoulder, she opened her eyes, but she seemed dazed, and her eyes weren't focusing properly. She was acting different from when she is usually groggy after a nap. I became worried and consulted my mother-in-law, telling her that something seemed off with Emily, but without even looking at her, she said, "It's probably just your imagination. She'll be fine." I believed my mother-in-law's words and waited for a while, but Emily's eyes never focused. Scared, I went to my husband John, who was working in the bedroom. "I know you're busy, but can you take out the car? Something's wrong with Emily. She seems completely out of it. It's strange. I'm worried. I want to take her to the hospital, please." I pleaded desperately, but John, seemingly annoyed, said, "Are you sure it's not just your imagination? What does my mom say?" "Your mom says she's fine, but she's clearly not okay to me." "If mom says she's fine, then she must be okay. I need to finish this today, don't bother me." "But I'm really worried." When I said this, John raised his voice, "Give me a break. Can't you see I'm working? I thought she finally stopped crying, and now you want to go to the hospital? Don't be ridiculous." I was so stunned by my husband's outburst that I couldn't say anything. Then, turning back to his computer, John muttered, "I never wanted a kid in the first place." His words still ring in my ears to this day. I couldn't believe my ears. It was unthinkable for John to say something like that. But I definitely saw him say it. I couldn't stop crying from the shock. I never thought John would say something like that. I left the bedroom, still crying, but when I saw Emily, my tears dried up. She was having convulsions. I thought something was wrong. Just a moment ago, Emily seemed perfectly fine, she didn't look ill at all. Panicking, I called a taxi and rushed to the emergency room. I couldn't stop trembling at the thought of something happening to Emily. When we arrived at the hospital, a pediatrician saw us right away. "There's a possibility of shaken baby syndrome," he said, and decided to do a CT scan on Emily. I didn't know about the disease, so I frantically looked it up while I was in the waiting room. Shaken baby syndrome is apparently a condition where a baby, whose neck muscles are still undeveloped, suffers brain damage due to being violently shaken. I learned that in severe cases, it could lead to death, which made my blood run cold. For a while, I was stunned and couldn't think about anything else. I don't know how much time had passed, but I was called in because the doctor wanted to discuss the results of the examination. Fortunately, Emily doesn't have any hematoma, and she's calmed down now since we've given her an anticonvulsant. The doctor said, bringing me relief. However, the doctor then said something unbelievable. "But, Mom, when the nurse was undressing Emily for the examination, she found marks on her neck and shoulders that looked like they were made by an adult's fingers." I don't mean to be rude, but have you ever abused your daughter? I didn't understand what he was implying. Shaken baby syndrome is a condition that occurs when a baby is shaken vigorously. It can happen while trying to comfort them, or during play when they're being tossed in the air, and things unfortunately go wrong. We were thinking that might be the cause, but looking at those marks, it's also possible someone intentionally shook her quite hard. The doctor continued in a matter-of-fact tone. "If you don't remember anything, it could have been another family member. We were able to treat her in time this round, and there was no hematoma, so she's fine. But if the same thing happens again, we can't guarantee Emily will be safe. I think you should have a serious talk with your family." I couldn't get the doctor's words out of my head even after I left the examination room. I have never abused my daughter, and I've never seen any signs of abuse on her. There were no marks on her when I changed her diaper and dressed her earlier today. I could only think that my mother-in-law must have done something while I was making Emily's milk. Emily would need to stay in the hospital for about 3 days just to be safe, so I decided to go home to get the things we needed. "Did you do something to Emily?" I asked my mother-in-law in a trembling voice when I got back home. Then, my mother-in-law responded, "What?" I didn't do anything, in a clearly suspicious manner. Usually, she would ask, "What do you mean? What happened? Did something happen?" But this time, she just denied it without asking anything. "Tell me the truth." As I yelled and confronted her, she finally admitted it. I just grabbed and shook her a little because she was being too noisy. "A little? The doctor said there were severe marks on her neck and shoulders. Because of what you did, Emily was in serious danger." When I said that, my mother-in-law responded nonchalantly, "Danger? But she's fine now, right? So what's the big deal?" "What? How can you say that?" I raised my voice, and at that moment, my husband came out of the bedroom. "Shut up, both of you. Keep it down," he said before slamming the door shut with a loud bang. I had sent him a message earlier, telling him that Emily was having seizures and we were going to the hospital, but he didn't ask about her condition and just complained about the noise. My husband, who did not seem remorseful at all for putting our daughter in danger. And my mother-in-law, who was unapologetic and casual about the whole situation. I had thought we had a good relationship, but it turned out I was wrong. That moment was when I lost all affection for them and gave up on this family. And then I hurriedly grabbed the bags for the hospital stay and my own belongings and left the house. Luckily, I had planned to return to my parents' house, so I had travel luggage ready and I grabbed that. In the taxi heading to the hospital where my daughter Emily was, I made up my mind to get a divorce. Some might think this is an overreaction, but for me, it was a big deal. Of course, I was furious at my mother-in-law's actions, but the main cause was my husband's behavior. I do think my husband's job is tough. The upcoming planning meeting, whether he gets selected or not, would change how fulfilling his work is for the next fiscal year. But that's not the kind of job you continue doing, neglecting the fact that your daughter has to go to the ER and is hospitalized. It's not a life-threatening job, nor is it a job that only he can do. It's about whether he becomes the project leader or the assistant. Yet, I was fed up with my husband, who is the only father Emily has, for not coming to us, let alone asking about her condition. 3 days after the admission, Emily was safely discharged from the hospital. Intending to divorce my husband, I did not return home but went to my parents' house. My husband and mother-in-law were supposed to visit my parents' house from that day, so they probably didn't think anything of it when I didn't show up. They didn't contact me. Back at my parents' house, I told them what had happened. My mom hugged Emily and me, crying, and after my dad angrily slammed his fist on the desk, he said, "You don't have to go back there. Stay here with us. I'll protect you and Emily." I broke down in tears at his words. After that, my parents and I started looking into divorce. With our layman's research, all we could understand was that divorce seemed difficult. My mother-in-law's actions weren't continuous, so it couldn't be considered abuse. If the other party contested the divorce, it seemed like it would be difficult even if it went to mediation. So, I decided to play hardball. On the 3rd day at my parents' house, I received a message from my husband, John, saying, "The presentation went well, so come back home. Let's celebrate its success." Irritated by his carefree attitude, I decided to go back home once to talk about divorce. I didn't want Emily to see John or my mother-in-law ever again, so I asked my mom to keep her at my parents' house. When I got home, John, surprised that I came back alone, finally asked, "Where's Emily? Is she still in the hospital? Is she that sick?" "Emily has been discharged. She's at my parents' house now. Why didn't you bring her back with you?" "I want a divorce." Both John and my mother-in-law were stunned. "What? Emily was safe this time. But what if you had shaken her more violently? If I hadn't noticed and left it be, Emily might not have made it. Thinking about it, I'm scared of you. Anne." I tried to continue pointing out John's issues when he interrupted me. "If you are scared of my mom, we can live separately. So please reconsider the divorce." At his words, my mother-in-law confronted him, saying, "What? You'd choose Emily over me?" Ignoring her, John said to me, "See? Isn't that okay?" I continued what I was saying earlier. "No. I am disappointed in you, John. I can't believe you said, 'I never wanted kids,' and I'm disappointed that you prioritized your job over our daughter's life. Whether we live separately from your mom or not, I can only think of divorce." When I said that, John grabbed my hand. "No way! I was out of my mind back then because of work. I love you and Emily. I apologize, so please don't talk about divorce. I think words and actions under pressure reveal true feelings, so I can't trust you anymore. I won't divorce you even if it comes to mediation." His words made my heart race. This would be bad for me if it went to mediation. It would be difficult to accuse his mother of abuse and use it as a reason for divorce, as I had researched at my parents' house. So, I decided to tell them a lie that I had thought of at that moment. "I don't mind if it goes to mediation. But if it does, your mother might get arrested for abuse. Just be prepared for that." "What do you mean by abuse?" His mother, who approached me with a frightening face, had no resemblance to the mother-in-law I used to like. I was suspected of abuse at the hospital. I told them I didn't do it, and I got a medical certificate. The marks on Emily's neck are also photographed. If I can prove that these hands belong to your mother, the abuse will be proven. If John insists on going through divorce mediation, I will submit the medical certificate and photos. In reality, this method had almost no effect. Even if it could be proven, it might not be considered abuse if they realized it was just a one-time incident. However, they seemed to believe it. "That would be a problem. Please think it over again. I have no intention of reconsidering. Besides, if you're going to file for mediation, I will comply, but I will make sure the dates are on weekdays. Can you prioritize us over your important work? John flinched when I said this. His mother was constantly begging him, "Hey, John. Please divorce her. I'm gonna get caught." For a while, John was silent, deep in thought. I added, "I will use any means necessary to divorce you. Even if it goes to mediation, even if your mother gets arrested, and even if you have to take time off work, it won't change the fact that we are getting divorced. If that's fine with you, go ahead." After thinking for a while longer, John reluctantly agreed to the divorce. Throughout the discussions about property division and child support, John repeatedly asked, "You're kidding, right? And can't you reconsider?" But I ignored all of it. In the end, we agreed to divide the assets in half and set the child support at $400 per month. My husband was reluctant to agree to the divorce until the very end, but it seemed like he finally realized my stance wasn't going to change, so he reluctantly agreed. I told him, "Feel free to dispose of all my belongings," and then I left the house. I had no intention of taking anything from that house with me. We had furniture at my parents' house, and I didn't want to remember anything about this house. As I left through the front door, I could hear John and his mother arguing. "It's all your fault, Mom. John, you said you didn't want Emily either, right? This is what you get." "What did you say?" "I covered for you so you wouldn't get caught. If you hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had to go to the hospital, and I wouldn't have had to hear all this. It's all your fault. I don't want Michelle to leave. I want you to leave." Later, I heard through the grapevine that John and his mother had separated. Apparently, they had been fighting non-stop since the incident. They were blaming each other for the divorce. Since the apartment was in John's name, his mother was kicked out and is now working in a cleaning job, being bossed around by people more than 20 years her junior. It's been a year since then, and Emily is growing up safely without any lingering effects. She's starting to learn words, calling me Mom and even saying Grandpa and Grandma. She's getting better at many things every day. My mother is looking after her, allowing me to rejoin the workforce at a local company. With my previous experience, I was placed in the planning department, but unlike John, I prioritize my family over work. I've heard about John's situation through former colleagues. Apparently, he struggled with living alone, couldn't concentrate on his work, and the project he proposed started to fail. Eventually, John was removed as project leader and was transferred from the planning department to human resources. It's quite the ironic story. My husband, who was so devoted, got taken off the planning department, and I, who have been prioritizing our family, got assigned to it. Moreover, my work is going really well. When I brainstorm with my daughter on my lap, a ton of great ideas come to me, and I'm able to write excellent project proposals. Not just in terms of work, my personal life has also been flourishing recently. There's this single father from my workplace, and things are going pretty well between us. We first hit it off talking about our kids and have become good friends since. On weekends, we take our kids to parks or amusement parks. His 3-year-old son has taken a liking to me, and he plays with my daughter too. He's also kind to my daughter, so I want to keep seeing him. I've just got divorced, so I'm not thinking about remarrying right away, but if things continue to go well, I hope someday I might become his wife. It all happened when we were sitting at the reception desk at our wedding. I've come here to get my compensation for the affair. Huh? Both John and I were literally dumbfounded. But what surprised me even more was the fact that John had indeed cheated. Damn! I thought I'd never get caught. And he was justifying it, making it impossible to have a proper conversation. Do you really think you have any appeal as a woman? I married you because you can cook well and you have a body that looks like it can bear healthy children. Stop kidding around! I had reached my limit and slapped John right across the face. Until now, no matter how rude John was, I had always got through it with a smile and a joke. But this time, I couldn't let it slide. I swore to myself that I wouldn't be satisfied until I had cornered him. On the long-awaited morning of our wedding, I was in the dressing room, wrapped in a pure white dress, secretly hoping that John would tell me, "Lily, you look beautiful." John had been high-spirited since the day before, genuinely looking forward to the wedding. I thought he would be pleased to see me looking different. In fact, I looked better than usual in the mirror, and both my parents and my in-laws praised me. I'm a bit on the chubby side and usually dress plainly. But today, I thought I should be allowed to enjoy being the star of the show. John and I are from the same university. When I was a freshman, he was a senior. I was a member of the broadcasting club, and that's how I met John, who was the captain of the sports team and a well-known figure on campus. Our relationship developed smoothly, and we submitted our marriage registration before our wedding, and we've been living together for the past 3 months. Living together made the wedding preparations more efficient. The wedding venue was about a 10-minute train ride from our house. It was a casual restaurant without any formality. The beautiful and stylish interior made it very popular for private parties. John entered the dressing room. I suppressed my excitement and asked, "Does the dress suit me?" Immediately, John broke into a wide smile and stroked my head. "You've still got a round belly, haven't you? Hope you'll give birth to a healthy baby." I was utterly dumbfounded. Even our parents frowned. "At least don't say that today." "Why?" "It's the truth. I even went on a diet to fit into this dress for the wedding, you know?" I forced a smile and patted my belly. In such moments, I feel bad inside, but I always try to brush it off with a joke. One of John's shortcomings is that once he gets too carried away, he can't stop himself. He was teasing and said, "Hey, your belly looks like a balloon." The bride is supposed to be the most beautiful woman on her wedding day. Stop it before you hurt Lily's feelings. John pretended not to know what he had done wrong, saying, "Well, a fat person is a fat person. I'm sorry for our son, he's always been childish. Even though you are younger, you are much more mature." There was no blame for my mother-in-law. "I don't mind. It's just his usual self." I flashed a grin and laid on the sarcasm as thick as I could. The two of us quickly pulled ourselves together and took our seats at the reception desk. We wanted a homey wedding and decided to greet the guests personally, bride and groom both. Sadly, most of my friends live on a distant island, where my parents' home is, so they couldn't make it. On the flip side, John had a lot of acquaintances attending. We were okay with the imbalance. My parents and I had made our peace with it. I saw this as a golden opportunity to meet many of John's friends and was actually looking forward to the greetings. John introduced each guest to me, one by one. Every single one of them seemed delighted to meet me, complimenting me with a "You look like a beautiful bride." There was one guest, in particular, that stood out, a woman named Natasha. She was an acquaintance from work, as I understood. She seemed to be in her 40s, but she had this actress-like aura, especially in her dress and her tall, slender figure. "Nice to meet you, Lily. I've always been under John's care," she greeted me. "Oh, is that so?" I was certainly overwhelmed by Natasha. "He's a looker, right? And she's got her stuff together at work. Quite a different story from someone else I know." She indeed had the aura of someone who's competent at her job. Her designer suit fitted her perfectly without being too flashy, and her makeup was flawless. John was looking at Natasha with a kind of admiration in his eyes that he never showed to me, and Natasha was gracefully accepting his attention. They exchanged words for quite a while. Right now, I'm a full-time housewife. But originally, I left my job because of John's wishes. He insisted that he wanted me to focus on our home. I had only been at my job for 2 years. Just when things were starting to get interesting, I felt pressured to resign. When I think about the unfinished business at my old job, I still feel a tug at my heartstrings. Looking at Natasha, who seemed so dazzling, made these feelings even stronger. This is wrong. Today's supposed to be about us. Our guests should leave having had a good time. I swallowed the anger rising inside me due to John's insensitive remark and kept up with the greetings. Then, a middle-aged man in a suit appeared. He had this impressive demeanor, almost like a distinguished actor. "Who's that gentleman over there?" I looked at John, but he seemed to be as clueless as I was. Maybe he wandered in by mistake. It's supposed to be a private event. Just as I was wondering how to handle this situation, the man spoke up. "I'm here to discuss the compensation for an affair." "Excuse me?" John and I were literally stunned. "I'm in this line of work." The man handed out his business card with a professional demeanor. It bore the name of a well-known company, and his job title was impressive. He was dressed in an expensive suit, and he carried himself with calm and composure. He didn't seem like he was making things up. "Are you John? Could you please break it off with my wife?" "Wait a minute, John and I are getting married today." I tried to calm the man down, but then I noticed John trembling beside me. "What are you talking about?" John managed to squeeze out those words, though his voice was clearly strained. "My wife should be here somewhere." "Don't play dumb, it won't get you anywhere."
Wait. Natasha and I aren't like that."
"Well, you've just admitted it yourself, haven't you? So, you're having an affair with my wife, Natasha, right?" I couldn't hide my shock.
"Natasha, you mean the woman we just greeted?"
"I believe so." "What did he say about Natasha?" "I heard it was work-related."
"Actually, Natasha doesn't work."
The man sighed deeply. "Let's change the place. Can we use the green room?" I asked my parents to handle the reception, and went ahead to the green room. The man, who introduced himself as Kyle, sat down on the sofa in the green room and started talking. It's a blatant lie that Natasha has anything work-related to do with John. I found out through her phone records that she met John on a dating site. My in-laws, who were already in the green room, exclaimed in surprise.
"We didn't know anything about this." "Don't make strange accusations, we could sue you for defamation."
But Kyle remained calm. "It seems that Natasha has been having an affair with John for 2 years. This time, I couldn't help raising my voice.
2 years ago. But we've been dating since our college days, isn't this some kind of mistake?"
The phone records show it clearly. "Actually, I've been very busy with work for the last few years, with lots of business trips and overtime. It seems that Natasha had the affair when I wasn't looking." Saying this, Kyle took an envelope out of his bag. Inside were printed screenshots of Natasha's smartphone and a couple of photos of her with John.
"This is definitely John in these photos, isn't it?"
My parents gathered around, and we all checked the photos. I've been away from home a lot, I can't say I was blameless. But does that justify an affair? My parents muttered in unison, "No, it doesn't." More than anything, Kyle's demeanor was incredibly convincing. From a certain point, Natasha started wearing a new wristwatch. It was a very nice design, so I looked it up and found out it was part of a pair. I wondered who had the other one, and that's when my investigation began. Kyle had been investigating Natasha's actions during his breaks at work, and discovered that she frequently visited a certain station. It turned out to be the station closest to John's company. They were frequently meeting up after John finished work. Kyle then took out several photos from the envelope that appeared to be taken secretly. They clearly showed John and Natasha getting cozy in a bustling district.
"You find it fun stalking like this? Don't take your frustrations out on me just because you can't keep your wife happy."
John's words were bold, but his voice was clearly trembling. "The serial number on my wife's wristwatch is 118. What about your wristwatch?" My parents restrained Kyle. I took off John's wristwatch and looked at the back of the dial. It's 118. This is a unique number in the world, right? Is it just a coincidence? How could that be? The evidence is all here. Why don't you just admit it and tell the truth? Suddenly, John raised his voice and started kicking the chairs in the green room.
"Damn it! I thought I'd never get caught.
John, is what this man is saying true? Without looking at us, John answered while fiddling with his smartphone. There's just one thing that's different. I really do love Natasha. My in-laws whispered to each other in a confused tone. Today, I invited her because Natasha said she wanted to see Lily. At that moment, there was a knock on the green room door. Natasha came in from the guest room. Apparently, John had called her with his smartphone. John, you really do love me, don't you? Of course. My feelings are all for you, Natasha. Natasha and John hugged each other without any hesitation. This time, I couldn't just laugh it off as a joke. I carefully chose my words and asked John. Is it true that you've been cheating? Since Natasha got married, I reluctantly decided to marry you. We met a bit too late, didn't we? If I had met John sooner, I would have married him instead of ending up with such an uncool person. Kyle straightened up from the sofa and said with a resolute attitude. See, they're so selfish, aren't they? I'm thinking about divorcing my wife. But I'm definitely going to demand a proper compensation for it. At the word alimony, John and Natasha momentarily flinched. John, did you know that Natasha was married when you started dating her? Yeah, I found out a while after we met. But by then, we were already serious about each other. So, you were cheating on me too, weren't you? Unexpectedly, John shook his head. This isn't cheating. Because I have no feelings for you. Then why were you dating me? You were just for housekeeping. What does just for housekeeping mean? According to John, Natasha was his true love, but he needed someone to take care of the household and he wanted children, so he decided to marry me. It seemed he also judged that it would be a good cover to get married around this time for the company and society. Do you really think you're attractive as a woman? I married you because you could cook a little and you seemed like you could bear strong children. I've had enough. I reached my limit and slapped John. It was the first time I had ever hit someone. My right hand was tingling. At the same time, I felt disgusted, as if I had touched something filthy. Immediately, Kyle pulled out a wet wipe from his bag and handed it to me. Gratefully, I took it and wiped my hands thoroughly. Ow! What the hell are you doing? You think you're in a position to defy me? Even my mother-in-law couldn't stay silent at his words. Have you always talked to Lily like that? No, Mom, I just lost my temper for a moment. Hey, Lily. I got scolded because of you. It's your fault. There's no way that's true. Is it really true that you've been cheating for the past 2 years? John snorted triumphantly. You can't trust what this guy says. Besides, the photos might be fake. But judging from your interactions, it seems like you two really are dating, aren't you? That doesn't prove anything. What, do you have a video or something? I cut into the conversation with my usual surprised tone. I have it on video. What? Actually, I had secretly recorded today's situation in the dressing room with a hidden camera, planning to show it as a surprise later. I took out the camera from behind the flower arrangement in the room and checked the footage. From the part where John called me fat to where Kyle confronted him about the affair, everything was recorded. Unexpectedly turning into big news. But it should be sufficient evidence of the affair. Well done, Lily. And as for this guy. Lily, I am truly sorry. My in-laws both apologized to me together. You don't need to apologize. No, it's also our fault for spoiling John and letting him become like this. What can we do to make it up to you? John, you should apologize too. No way. I haven't done anything wrong. Loving someone is a good thing, right? That's what Mom taught me. That's not what I meant. Stop talking back and apologize to Lily right now. It's okay. The foolish one here is John. John, Natasha, how about making a cheating confession in front of the camera? Say cheese. I grinned and pointed the camera at them. I didn't expect to have this side of me. Hey, don't make that face. Just joke around and reply like you always do. This is my way of joking around. I can't overlook this. Then should we cancel the wedding? You're the one who's going to be embarrassed. I was at a loss for words. The party's start time had already passed. The guests must be waiting for our entrance at the venue. No, I should stick to my own decision. Fortunately, I had invited only a few guests. And they were all trusted close friends, so I could make up for it later. The one who really deserves pity here is John. He cares about appearances, so he invited his bosses from work and even his mentors from his college days. All right, I've got it. Let's start the wedding ceremony. However, just to let you know, we are going to change the flow a bit. I went out to the venue and took the microphone from the MC. John followed behind me. There was a round of applause from the audience. Thank you all for gathering here today. We were supposed to hold a wedding ceremony, but today's event has been changed to an emergency press conference. The venue suddenly became noisy with whispers and murmurs. With clear and articulate pronunciation, as if I had been trained in broadcasting, I continued. Today, we have a guest named Natasha, who is an acquaintance of John through work. But in reality, well, John? I turned the microphone towards John, like an interviewer. The people in the venue looked puzzled. John hesitated to speak, so I pressed him further. What is your real relationship with her? Voices from the audience also started to chime in, urging him to spill the beans already. Still, John seemed determined to remain silent. If this weren't in front of so many people, I would probably have been slapped hard. His fists were trembling under the table. No choice then. This was supposed to be a surprise for today, but please take a look at the hidden camera footage in the backstage. Everyone, please feel free to enjoy your drinks and meals. The large screen on the stage showed everything that had happened earlier, without missing a beat. As the video played, the audience watched intently, and gradually, voices of discontent started to rise. What's going on here? This is ridiculous. From the crowd, someone asked, you two are already living together, aren't you? We met in college, registered our marriage 3 months ago, and have been living together since, leading up to today. The venue was in an uproar. I thought I was marrying John out of love, but it seems I was utterly deceived. I adjusted my life for him, even quitting my job. What has my life been all about? I could hear John clicking his tongue in frustration. A different guest asked, Lily, what do you want to do now? The atmosphere had completely turned into that of a press conference. To be honest, this is all so sudden, I haven't had time to think it through. But I have my parents and trustworthy friends. I plan to figure things out together with them. This response led to a series of repeated questions from the crowd. John kept his head down, acting as if this had nothing to do with him. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you must have a lot of things you want to say, so I will leave the stage to him. You can grill him as much as you want. I put down the microphone and moved to the entrance of the venue, watching the scene unfold. John was left alone on the stage. Some young men in the audience, their tempers flaring, stood up and approached John, some even throwing drinks and food at him. All right, I get it. I was dating Natasha. Lily just wasn't enough for me. At that moment, my mother-in-law appeared, took the microphone, and addressed everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for my foolish son. If it's not too much trouble, please feel free to give him a piece of your mind. At her signal, people swarmed the stage and surrounded John. I couldn't see John anymore, but I imagined he was getting what he deserved. I thought about how expensive his rental suit was. Concerned about appearances, John had rented the best suit. With this commotion, he would surely have to pay for it. Satisfied after witnessing the chorus of boos from the audience, I returned to the backstage, quickly changed out of my dress, and left the rest to my parents. I also asked them to make sure John couldn't run away from the venue. I wanted to go home immediately. Ever since we started living together, John had been extremely opposed to me entering his room. He would get angry even if I tried to enter for cleaning or searching for something. I suspected there might be some evidence of his infidelity in his room. I asked Kyle to come with me, and we left the venue, heading for home. I was grateful that we had chosen a wedding venue close to our home. Soon we arrived at our house, and the search of John's room began. And then, one thing after another started to come out. Pictures of Natasha, and what seemed to be matching accessories and a pair of watches warranty card, and letters from Natasha, were all revealed. It even came to light that he was traveling with Natasha under the guise of business trips. Kyle meticulously photographed each of these items, and I put them in a cardboard box. It was almost like a police house search. Once all the evidence was gathered, I video called my mother-in-law. "Hi, how's everything going over there?" Bravely, she responded as if nothing was unusual. "The guests are getting heated, and John is still being cornered by everyone." "That's good to hear. Can you put your phone near the microphone so that my voice can be heard in the venue?" She quickly understood what I meant and did as I asked. "Hello, can you hear me? I'm the bride who was supposed to be the star today." I could sense the murmuring in the venue quieting down. "I know some of you might be angry. I have an important announcement to make." The venue went silent. "I will be divorcing John. Unfortunately, today's wedding turned out to be a disaster, but feel free to eat and drink as much as you like, and go home whenever you're ready. The cost will be fully charged to John."
Wait. I wasn't informed about this.
Kyle, who was standing next to me, signaled for me to pass the phone to him. "While we're on the subject, I have an announcement too. I'm also divorcing Natasha." The crowd murmured in surprise. "John, Natasha is an expensive woman. She doesn't do any housework, shops every week, and is absolutely incompetent at work. But now, both of you are free, so please, live happily ever after."
What am I supposed to do now?
You're free to do as you please. Good luck supporting Natasha's lifestyle."
I can't afford to support Natasha's lifestyle.
Natasha, who was nearby, cut in.
I'm not comfortable marrying John either.
"Then you're all alone. Good riddance. Don't bother coming back home from today onwards." A round of applause erupted in the venue. Drunk guests' voices could be heard saying, "Good for her," and other cheers. Reluctantly, my mother-in-law agreed to let John stay at her house for a while. Warm messages like "It must have been tough, but you did well. We support you," started arriving on my phone from close friends who were at the venue. Afterwards, the guests reportedly indulged in a grand feast and drinks, and even made sure to take their wedding favors home with them before leaving. A few days after the tumultuous wedding, I was returning to my condo after shopping when I found John standing in front of my door, holding a disproportionately large bouquet of flowers. "I came to apologize, hoping you would forgive me. Can I come in?" "No." "Come on, don't be so stubborn. The wedding was just a moment of confusion, right?"
Absolutely not.
John, for some reason, had a smug smile on his face. He tried to hand me the huge bouquet of roses. "All women love flowers, right? Cheer up." But I had shopping bags in both hands and couldn't possibly accept the flowers. Not that I wanted to, even if my hands were free.
I'm sick of your assumptions and lack of consideration. Just go home.
John slowly moved closer to me. I felt threatened and turned my back on him to call my mother-in-law. The back and forth with John continued, and when he tried to force his way into the house with a spare key, my mother-in-law arrived just in time.
What the hell are you doing?
A shout from my usually refined mother-in-law, which I had never heard before, echoed throughout the area. "Mom, why are you here?" "I came here thinking of making amends with Lily."
Don't talk nonsense and just disappear. Do not show your face in front of us ever again.
With that, my mother-in-law snatched John's bouquet and hit him square in the face with it. John's face was covered in small cuts from the rose thorns, and torn petals and leaves were scattered all over his body, making for a truly pitiful sight.
If you make any more strange moves, I'm calling the police.
And don't you even think about coming back to our house." He seemed genuinely scared by her words. John left with his tail between his legs.
"I'm really sorry about this. Actually, I declared yesterday that I was severing parental ties with him. He left the house, but I never imagined he would be here."
While efficiently cleaning up the remains of the bouquet scattered on the floor, my mother-in-law apologized to me over and over again. "You don't have to apologize. Please come in and have some tea."
"No, I'm going to excuse myself now. If he comes near you again, don't hesitate to contact me. I will protect you, no matter what."
I was on the verge of tears from her words. I had an ally on my side. I decided to rely on her in times of trouble, and with that, we said our goodbyes. Later on, I managed to finalize the divorce, and I was relieved. I and Kyle each demanded $30,000 in damages from John. I didn't forget to claim the full $20,000 for the wedding expenses, including the gifts for the guests. The guests seemed to have enjoyed themselves quite a bit, and I couldn't help but laugh when I saw the hefty bill. John, unable to cover the costs with his salary alone, had moved to a cheap, small one-room apartment and was working tirelessly day and night. His boss had attended the wedding, which resulted in him losing face at work as well, but he couldn't afford to quit his job because he needed to make ends meet. Now, it seems like he's living every day in a very uncomfortable and awkward position. I heard from my mother-in-law that right after that incident, Natasha broke up with him. Apparently, Natasha had met another man through an online dating site and decided to date him instead. I can hardly imagine that things will go well for them. Especially since Natasha also has to pay us damages. I moved to a smaller, but nicer apartment. Moving was a hassle, but I decided it was risky to let John know where I lived. The evidence of John's affair is packed in a large cardboard box, sitting in a corner of my new home. So far, the alimony has been paid on time, but I haven't touched the money at all. Thanks to that, my savings have increased significantly. In the midst of all the commotion, a strange kind of fortune befell me. I lost about 15 pounds due to the stress of the divorce. Every time I looked in the mirror, I felt like I had been reborn. I went back to work, and through business contacts, I was able to meet a wonderful man. We are still dating, and every day is fulfilling. I have a good feeling that things will work out with my new partner this time. Thank you for taking care of the stupid old. My brother-in-law and his wife had promised to move with my mother-in-law, who has dementia. However, they dumped her belongings and swiftly left, forcing us to take care of her. My husband and I were in shock. But my mother-in-law was nodding with a smile. However, today's smile from her wasn't her usual confused one. My mother-in-law waved at their car with a grin. And then she loudly said, "They don't have a home anymore." Huh? No more home? What in the world is she talking about? What was this surprising counterattack from my mother-in-law on my brother-in-law and his wife who were looking forward to moving? My name is Christine Parker. I'm 34 and work at a company. My husband, David, and I shared the same hobbies, and we both tragically lost our parents early in life. David lost his father during his college years, while I lost both my parents in a car accident when I was young. We both had longings for a warm family, so we got married pretty quickly. At the time of our wedding, my mother-in-law told me, "From now on, think of me as your real mother. You can always rely on me." It was comforting for someone like me, who had lost her parents at a young age, to hear such words. After our marriage, we frequently visited her. Those were happy days, but I had one concern. It was David's elder brother, Michael. Michael, 2 years older than David, was 36 at the time we got married and was still single, living at home. I had no problem with him living at home, but Michael was the complete opposite of David in terms of personality. While David is reserved and humble, Michael judges people by their appearance and status. If he deems someone beneath him, he's outright rude, a typical jerk. Moreover, Michael looks down on David and me, working at an average company, and ridicules us every time he sees us. "What?
you're here again? Must be nice to have so much free time. Working in a trading company, can't afford to be so leisurely.
Even though we were visiting to see my mother-in-law, Michael would often say such things.
I'm really sorry about the rude things Michael says. I know I spoiled him, but lately, he doesn't listen to me at all.
My mother-in-law always apologized in his absence. I know I might be a pain sometimes, but I genuinely enjoy talking to you, Christine. Do you think you'll visit again? She had said that to me. We didn't want to leave her alone with Michael, and more than anything, I genuinely enjoyed our chats with her. So, David and I continued to visit her often. Then, about a year later, we suddenly heard that Michael was getting married. We knew Michael had found a girlfriend and had moved out, but was he getting married? It was quite the surprise for us. But after meeting his bride-to-be, it all made sense. Emily, the person my friend married, sure was a character with strong quirks. She identifies her occupation as a live streamer.
Girls as cute as me will always be in demand, no matter the age.
Emily boldly stated this upon our first meeting, even though she's turning 35 this year. I'm not one to comment on someone's profession, but I was taken aback that she could confidently refer to herself as a cute girl at 35. While the rest of us were taken aback by Emily's boastful introduction, Michael was sitting next to her, nodding proudly.
We actually talked about wanting to become YouTubers as a couple, you know. But my company has a strict no-side job policy. They're so behind the times, aren't they?
I genuinely felt relieved that my brother-in-law's company had that policy, but I wondered if it was okay for Michael to be nearing 40 and still talking like that. As we listened with a mix of astonishment, Emily suddenly turned the conversation to me.
By the way, Christine, what do you do for work?
I wished she'd just leave me alone. Though I felt that way, I couldn't ignore her, so I briefly introduced myself. But as soon as Emily heard my story, she quickly responded, "Really? Doesn't that sound kinda bland? Are you actually enjoying your life doing that? Seriously.
You guys seem to have such dull lives. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance, you know. Gotta live it up or you're missing out."
To top it all off, even Michael joined in with those remarks. With a concerned look on her face, my mother-in-law said, "Well, if you two have decided on this, I won't oppose your marriage. Just make sure you don't inconvenience others and work together to live an honest life." After my mother-in-law made her point clear, the two of them left in a hurry. I really wondered if those two would be all right in the future. Watching them leave, we exchanged worried glances. Michael was a handful on his own, and now there was another problematic person to deal with. Still, for my mother-in-law and David, Michael is a cherished family member just the same. We immediately began discussing how we should interact with the two of them moving forward. Despite our concerns, everything was peaceful for about a year.
Are you sure you're okay on your own? Wanna come live with us?
We had offered my mother-in-law to stay with us. However, she reassured us, "I'm fine on my own. Don't worry about me. I have plenty of friends around here. Just focus on living a happy life together." Indeed, my mother-in-law is sociable and has many friends in the neighborhood. But she's already 63 years old. While folks in their 60s these days are still quite spry, we can't help but worry about the what-ifs. With these thoughts in mind, we visited her that day. Then, to our surprise, Michael and Emily had come over. In the year since they got married, they hadn't visited the house at all, yet now they were lounging around as if they owned the place.
"Oh? David, you guys are here too? What's the occasion?" "We come over every week."
When David said that, Michael gave David a look as if he wanted to say something, but then turned to my mother-in-law and said, "All right then, take care." With that, they promptly left.
What were they here for?
Then, David asked my mother-in-law, but she replied, "It's nothing really." She didn't seem inclined to talk about it at all. Michael's last words had piqued my curiosity, so I chimed in, "You say it's nothing, but there must be the reason. What was that?" However, the mother-in-law just gave vague answers.
"Please, if there's anything going on, let us know anytime."
In the end, we told her that and headed home for the day. That evening, David received a call from Michael.
David, it seems like you guys visit Mom quite often. Could you stop?
He blurted out such a thing unexpectedly. When pressed for an explanation, he said, "You guys must be busy with work, right? Emily is working from home and will take care of Mom. So, just stop coming over." Then he abruptly hung up the phone. They've been married for a year, and after not seeing her for so long, this sudden demand seemed suspicious. What on earth is Michael thinking? Driven by our concerns, we visited her the following weekend. And, sure enough, Michael and Emily were there too. The moment Michael saw us, he looked irritated and said, "What do you want?" "I told you, we're gonna take care of Mom. There's no need for you to come." We tried to defend ourselves, but my mother-in-law's subsequent words left us speechless.
David, Christine, thank you for always coming over despite being busy. But, as Michael said, from now on he will be visiting. So, you two enjoy your weekends.
To our shock, my mother-in-law was siding with Michael. Hearing this, a smug-looking Michael said, "You heard what Mom said, right? If you get it, then get going." With that said, we were kicked out of the house. We couldn't believe it, but if my mother-in-law says so, there's nothing we can do. Still, concerned for her, we started calling her more often.
Everything okay? You're doing well.
Every time, she'd reply, "Michael is visiting, so I'm fine. But how about you two? You having a good time?" She seemed more concerned about us than herself.
We're having fun, but we'd like to see you from time to time. Can we come over this weekend? I've already made plans with Michael this weekend. I'm sorry, maybe next time.
In the end, she'd always decline our visits. We didn't mind what Michael said, but when my mother-in-law pushed us away, it felt like a rejection, making us a bit lonely. Then one day, after days like that, David received another call from Michael.
"We're gonna move, so there's no point in you coming here anymore."
David was at a loss for words with the sudden news. Michael was about to hang up the phone. In a panic, I quickly asked, "Why are you suddenly moving?" Michael, with a sharp click of his tongue, replied, "You guys haven't been to the house recently, so you probably don't know. Mom's going senile. We're worried about leaving her alone, so we're building a new house and moving." My mother-in-law is becoming senile? That can't be. She was fine the last time we spoke on the phone. But Michael snapped, "You only talked to her briefly, right? How could you tell from that? She's got dementia. That's what's going on." And with that, he hung up. We hurriedly called my mother-in-law and asked, "Are you feeling all right? Everything okay?" But she simply replied, "I'm fine, I'm fine. You don't need to worry about a thing." And then she hung up. What on earth is happening? That weekend, we hurriedly headed to her place. Naturally, Michael and Emily were there.
"You're back again? I told you not to come anymore."
Michael approached us with a sharp click of his tongue.
"How can we just sit still after hearing such news? We're worried."
I replied, but Michael snapped, "Shut up." However, my mother-in-law just listened to our argument with a smile and a nod. I couldn't help but look at her and whispered her name. Michael, having heard that, said, "I told you. She doesn't make sense anymore. We can't leave her alone, so we're taking her in. That's our kindness. You get it?" He said it with a smirk.
"If that's the case, we can."
But before I could finish, Michael interrupted, "Both of you work, right? What are you gonna do with this senile old woman during the day?"
"Don't talk about her that way,"
I blurted out. But, in fact, no one is home during the day in our house. I couldn't argue that point and just remained silent. I just stayed silent. It's frustrating, but maybe we have to do as Michael says for now. Feeling utterly helpless, we said, "We'll come visit on our days off." Upon saying that, Emily then replied, "If you come over that often, it'll be such a bother for me. I really don't like it." With her usual lisping way of speaking. The thought of leaving my mother-in-law with someone like her. I exchanged a worried glance with David, but he just looked down and shook his head. Whether my mother-in-law understood or not, she just kept smiling and said, "It's okay." Later, we got the moving schedule from Michael and reluctantly headed home. Come moving day. When we arrived at the in-laws, we were told that the packing was just finished. Emily remarked, "If you were gonna come, you should have come earlier and helped." Bad timing on your part, but when we peeked inside, there were still many items left.
There's still a lot of stuff here,
I pointed out, and Michael replied, "We don't want to take this old junk with us. We're gonna toss it."
A few pieces of clothing are more than enough for an old lady.
Both Emily and Michael were saying such things together.
Hey! Stop it!
When I yelled in frustration, Michael shot back, "Then you guys take care of her," and they both jumped in their car. As they drove off, they threw a bag containing a few of my mother-in-law's clothes out the window, shouting, "Good luck with the old lady. Bye." They left us with those parting words, then coolly drove off to their new place. David and I stood there, dumbfounded. Yet my mother-in-law just kept smiling and nodding. But today, my mother-in-law wasn't wearing her usual absent-minded smile. Instead, she had that sharp and slightly mischievous grin I knew so well from back in the day. As I looked at her, puzzled, my mother-in-law waved cheerfully at their car. Then she said just one thing. "They don't have a home anymore." What? No home? What on earth was she talking about? Looking at David, I saw he was just as bewildered, staring at my mother-in-law. But ignoring our dumbfounded faces, my mother-in-law briskly picked up her bags and said, "David, Christine, how long are you gonna just stand there? Come on, let's go inside and have some snacks."
What do you mean?
She just looked back at us with a smile full of glee and beckoned us to the entrance. Once inside, she explained everything to us. What we learned was utterly astonishing. The reason why they recently came to visit her house. And her scheme upon discovering it. Each piece of information was beyond our wildest imaginations. A few months back, they suddenly showed up at her place. There was an instance when my mother-in-law stepped out for a bit, and she overheard the two of them having an argument.
Are you sure this is really okay? Hey! Keep your voice down.
Feeling a sense of foreboding, my mother-in-law discreetly listened in as Michael said, "That old hag must have stashed some cash somewhere. If we play our cards right and end up living with her, we can take over her assets."
But I really don't want to live with your mom. For the money, we have to bear with it. If only she'd go senile, we could hand her off to David. That would be perfect. We get the cash and let David take care of her. I wonder how we can make her senile. Is there a way to hasten it?
It seems that for the first year of their marriage, they had a great time living together in their rented apartment. However, after a year of reckless spending, they blew through their savings, and Michael's salary wasn't enough to support them anymore. Emily claimed to be a live streamer, but she hardly had any fans and was only broadcasting to a handful of viewers out of self-satisfaction. Naturally, that meant no real income was coming in. With their day-to-day life becoming more challenging, the two even resorted to borrowing from loan sharks. Desperate, they plotted to get their hands on my mother-in-law's assets. My mother-in-law was widowed young, but as it turns out, my father-in-law had been in real estate. Taking over, my mother-in-law turned out to be quite wealthy from the real estate business. Upon overhearing this conversation, she thought if she passed on the assets as they were, it would ruin the two of them. If they wish for it, then I shall oblige and play the part of the forgetful one. With that thought in her mind, she decided to feign dementia to scare the two of them off. Unaware that she was just pretending to have dementia, the couple brazenly started discussing their plans to take over the assets right in front of her.
No way, Mom's really lost it, huh?
Emily, did you do something?
Of course not. Maybe my wishes worked. But what are we gonna do now? If she's gone senile this early, will we actually get the money? Don't worry. First, we tell her we want to build a house to live together. That way, she'll build the house and put it in my name. Then, we say we need extra cash, and get another $100,000. I bet if we play up the dementia angle, David and the others will say we should take care of it. Once we have her blessing, we can pass her off and live it up in our new place. How about that? My plan's bulletproof, right?
Yeah.
Sounds awesome. But do you really think it'll go that smoothly? Don't worry about it. She's out of it, and plus, David and the others are so annoyingly righteous, it'll be fine.
It's scary to think they were planning all along to dump her on us after securing the new house and the money. But my mother-in-law, even hearing this, didn't panic and continued her preparations calmly, pretending to be confused. We were like, if you had just told us. But she said, I didn't want to involve you guys. Sorry for the worry. My mother-in-law said that, laughing. However, hearing this, a question popped up for us.
Wait a sec, but what about the house?
When David said this, my mother-in-law chuckled, you'll see soon enough. It's about time, isn't it? Right at that moment, the phone rang. It was Michael. When my mother-in-law answered, he shouted, what the heck is this? Michael is yelling.
They're telling me I can't live here because it's a rental contract. That's awful. You tricked us.
Emily joined in, making a scene. Turns out, there was more to my mother-in-law's plan. My mother-in-law had conspired with a realtor, an old friend of her late husband, to prepare the new house they had bought to be rented out instead. And today, she was waiting on site for them. Moreover, she had inflated the cost and taken extra money from them to build a large parking lot, leaving them without any money to their name. With a smile, she informed them of this.
Hey! I'm the owner of this house, aren't I? What gives you the right to do this? Oh? The owner? I seem to recall paying and putting it in my own name. You were supposed to be senile.
Senile? What are you talking about?
As you can see, I'm as sharp as ever. Damn you, old hag! I won't forget this. You'll never be forgiven.
Michael was still yelling over the phone even now. But my mother-in-law, unfazed and calm, replied, Michael, knock it off. You're an adult now. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet. Relying on others and taking them for granted, making a fool of everyone around you. That's no way to go through life. After saying that, she nonchalantly hung up the phone. Additionally, she had already arranged for the movers to deliver the belongings not to the new house but to a rental storage unit. Her friend waiting at the storage facility, and she received confirmation that the belongings were safely delivered. I thought Michael's plan was diabolical, but it turned out my mother-in-law was even craftier. After that, Michael and Emily stormed into my mother-in-law's house, still fighting furiously. But since they were making such a scene when they arrived, we ended up calling the cops. And when the police showed up, Michael got violent with them too and got himself arrested for obstructing an officer in the performance of their duties. Emily, who was watching, exclaimed, I didn't do anything, and then she just took off running. Even though Michael was arrested, he was released soon after since it was his first offense. With nowhere else to go, he was allowed to stay at the company dorm out of the company's goodwill, but the whole mess had become known at work, and he's feeling pretty small about it. But if he quits his job, he'll have neither a place to live nor any income. So, he's biting the bullet and desperately working. Emily asked Michael divorce and went back to her parents' house, but she's been disowned because of the whole ordeal, and I heard she's living and working at a nightclub now. As for me, after all that went down, I got transferred to a department at my company that allows remote work, so now I'm working from home. And so, we set up our new home near my mother-in-law's place and smoothly started living together with her. We've become really good friends with the real estate agent who helped us with the move and the neighbors around my mother-in-law's house, and now we even go out together as families.
If only we had done this from the start.
We chat about this, living peacefully day by day.
You've got a spare room, don't you? I'm moving in, so you need to leave.
My sister-in-law and mother-in-law, who'd suddenly shown up at my brand new house, walked around sizing everything up, not even pausing to pay respects to my mother's memorial plaque before confronting me with this demand. My husband, Jason, acted like he didn't have a care in the world, lounging on the sofa with our cat even as he heard what was happening. I looked up to the heavens and thought, this is the end. Filled with a fiery determination for revenge, I calmly said, all right then, take care, and sold the house I'd barely lived in. My name is Madison, and I'm a 30-year-old office worker. Growing up in a single-parent household, I watched my mom struggle financially, so I worked hard to earn scholarships and relieve her burden as much as I could. She also wanted me to go to college. Probably because she had a hard time without a degree herself. To fulfill her wish, I studied relentlessly while others were out having fun and got into a top university, straight through. After graduating, I landed a job at a leading corporation. When the job offer came, my mom and I jumped for joy. The day I got my first paycheck, we splurged on sushi in Beverly Hills, but we were both so tense in the upscale environment that we couldn't even taste the food. I was worried about fitting in at a glamorous company since I'd always been focused on my studies, but my colleagues were very kind, and I managed to get by. Even with a good salary, my mom and I couldn't shake our frugal habits. She continued working part-time and living in our small apartment. Our only indulgence became going out to enjoy delicious meals occasionally. Every time we did, my mom would say, having such a wonderful daughter who can treat me to meals like this, I'm truly blessed. Thank you. That always made me feel proud and like all my efforts were worthwhile. But 4 years into my career, perhaps due to years of hardship, my mom's health began to decline. We went on a spa trip to hopefully improve her health, and although she seemed happy, her condition didn't get better. She kept going through cycles of rest and activity. I was consumed with worry. What would I do without her? That was all I could think about. That's when I met Jason. He was 2 years younger, a born salesman, and an outsourced sales rep with a silver tongue. Embarrassingly, at 27, I'd never had a boyfriend. Between studying and the fear of being judged for my lack of experience at my age, I had always run from any potential relationships, and before I knew it, I was 27. Jason effortlessly became a part of my life. We both didn't have fathers and loved cats. And since neither of us could keep a pet, sharing favorite cat videos and dreaming of having one someday was what brought us close. After a while, he suggested we go to a cafe. I agreed, heart racing, and he texted back that he'd wanted to ask sooner but was worried about being turned down. I was over the moon, not realizing at the time that it was probably a line he'd used before. But I believed he truly cared for me. And then, as our relationship started, something miraculous happened. My mom began to regain her spirits as she saw me dressing up and going out. She'd say with a smile, I'll take care of the house. You go and have a good time, almost as if she were the one going on the date. I had always thought sacrificing my happiness was the way to repay her. But I realized that my happiness made her happy too, just as her happiness was mine. As Jason and I became closer, my mom's health improved, and she spent less time bedridden. When I told Jason about such a conversation with my mother, he proposed, saying, hey, why don't we just get married? That way, your mom can rest a little easier, you know? Despite it being only 6 months into our relationship, I was completely smitten with Jason. His sister and mother were hairstylists who ran a salon together, and since they planned to live together in the future, he assured me that it wouldn't be a problem for him to live with my mother. When I introduced Jason to my mother, she was moved to tears and grasped both his hands, saying, please, take good care of Madison. Jason firmly held her hands in return and declared while looking into my mother's eyes, I'm honored, ma'am. I might be younger and not very reliable, but I promise to make Madison happy. At that moment, I was so overjoyed I almost cried, but looking back now, I realize he was nothing but a terrible jerk. I would later come to understand how little experience I had with the opposite sex, or rather, how little I knew about the world. Following his declaration, Jason moved in with us, bringing along a slightly large suitcase. He suggested that it would be best to start living together in the house my mother was accustomed to. We welcomed Jason into our small apartment, and while my mother enthusiastically explained how everything worked, he barely listened and said, don't mind me, I doubt I'll be here much. I knew he was often out drinking for work and busy with client golf or surfing on Sundays, so I thought that was what he was referring to. But the reality was different. He truly never came home. On the rare occasions he did, he would just take a bath, sleep, and upon waking up, he would ask me, "Hey, can you give me some money for food?" At first, I didn't understand and asked him honestly, "Why don't you just eat here? Besides, what about your share of the living expenses, Jason?" Jason had not been contributing financially to the household, and my mother and I were living just as we had before. He then laughed with a puzzled look on his face. "Living expenses? Why should I, when I'm hardly ever here?" I almost agreed with him for a second, but then I shook myself out of it and challenged him.
Wait a minute. We're married, right? That means we're supposed to share our lives together, so.
You want me to come home every day?
No, I get that you're busy and maybe staying at friends' places, but I'd like to get a message from you when that's the case.
While we were dating, Jason was very attentive, always letting me know if he was going to be late for a date, and he never broke a promise. But after we got married, he stopped reading my texts, and days would go by without a reply. When I brought this up, Jason suddenly turned ice cold and said, "Didn't think you were the kind of woman to say stuff like that," and turned away. His cold expression was something I had never seen before, and it chilled me to the bone. So I blurted out, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be possessive." And he instantly softened, "I know. But come on, we're married, right? Don't you trust me?" he asked, tilting his head. I shook my head vigorously. "No, that's not it. I do trust you," I said, almost in tears, and he looked into my eyes and whispered, "Thank you," then quickly added, "So, about $600 will do, okay?" Fearing he might leave me, I gave in and handed over the money. In hindsight, that was the beginning of a nightmare. To avoid worrying my mother, I couldn't confide in her and explained that Jason was just on a lot of business trips. Alone with my thoughts, I continued this strange marriage, where I would give money to Jason whenever he occasionally came home. When I finally couldn't stand it anymore and confronted him, he simply wrote his name on a divorce paper and handed it to me, saying, "If you get sick of this, you can leave me at any time." It's strange how humans work. Being given such an option made it impossible for me to leave. Jason had clearly read my mind. My mom noticed something was off with me, but she never tried to address it. As half a year passed, for some reason, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law started coming over to our place more often. Even though they supposedly ran a beauty salon, they'd show up on weekdays or weekends, without even bringing a small gift, sit in Jason's room while he was out, and say, "Don't mind us. Just some tea and snacks will do," and they'd stay for hours, sometimes even joining us for lunch or dinner. When I eavesdropped on their conversations, they were mostly bad-mouthing others, creating a really unpleasant atmosphere. One day, loud enough for me to hear, my sister-in-law said, "Wow, can't believe he married such a plain Jane. Her fashion sense is so drab," and with reckless abandon, my mother-in-law added, "Well, if she were attractive, she'd probably cheat on you," and they laughed heartily together. They didn't specify who, but I knew they were talking about me. When I was reeling from the shock and covering my ears, I heard the damning words, "Well, she's pretty much a good cash cow, isn't she?" And with only her mom around, said my sister-in-law, and my mother-in-law chimed in with a worldly tone, "Seems easy enough to get money out of her. Plus, we get to do whatever we want," and they cackled again. I wanted to storm out of the room and tell them to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Since that day, I've been feeling really down. Jason, as usual, didn't come home and didn't even read my messages. During this time, I failed to notice my mom's health deteriorating again. Then one day at work, I got a call that my mom had been rushed to the hospital by ambulance. When I got there, I found out she had fallen down the stairs of our apartment complex, severely injuring her back. The doctor said that, given her age, she'd likely have to use a wheelchair from now on. From what I was told, Mom had been feeling under the weather for quite some time, experiencing frequent bouts of dizziness. It seems that dizziness was the culprit behind her fall down the stairs. My mom kept apologizing. "I'm so sorry, Madison. I'm really sorry." Over and over, and I just shook my head, crying. I was determined to break through this tough situation. Given that my mom's hospital stay would be quite long, including rehabilitation, I decided to look for a wheelchair-accessible home. Fortunately, we had lived frugally, so there was a decent amount of savings. My mom always loved looking at home ads in the newspapers, often saying how much she'd like to live in such houses. I held on to the hope that buying the home she dreamt of might bring her spirit back. When I asked Jason for his opinion, he casually said, "Why not? I'd like my own room." "Oh yeah, let's get a cat too." And seeing Jason's happy face for the first time in a long while made me foolishly happy, so I enthusiastically started house hunting. Luckily, I found the perfect spec house right in our neighborhood. It was completely wheelchair accessible. I felt it was destiny and made an immediate purchase. I could afford a down payment of around $360,000, and thanks to being employed by a top-notch company, the mortgage was easily approved. Of course, Jason didn't contribute a dime, but that had become the norm. He only visited my mom once at the hospital. By the way, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, despite their frequent visits to our house, never came to see her. I hurried to finalize the house deal before my mom was discharged, and managed to move us in perfectly. It was honestly exhausting to balance work and moving, but thinking of my mom and Jason's happy faces, I pushed through. When my mom came to the new house in her wheelchair, her eyes sparkled as she looked around our model home-like place and exclaimed like a child, "I can't believe I get to live in a house like this. It feels like a dream." Jason too seemed to like his new room, as he started coming home more often. Then we went to the pet store together and brought home 2 adorable cats. Both Jason and my mom doted on the cats, and our home was filled with lively energy. Just as I was starting to think everything might turn out okay, tragedy struck again. 2 months after moving in, one morning, my mom didn't wake up. I found it strange and went to check on her, only to discover she had passed away, cold. I called an ambulance, but it was too late. She had suffered a heart attack. With the new house and everything else seemed so pointless now, I was overwhelmed by despair and hardly remember the funeral proceedings. Jason acted the part of the dutiful, gentle husband at the funeral, but as soon as we got home, he'd do nothing but flop on the couch and say, "Man, I'm beat," tossing the urn carelessly on a shelf. He then asked me, "When's dinner?" as I sat holding my mother's memorial plaque, and just played with the cat. Seeing this, I finally snapped back to reality. I'd realized a long time ago that my marriage was a mistake. But I'd been pretending everything was fine, so as not to worry my mother. I also didn't want to admit my failure to myself. But can I really call him my husband if he doesn't even comfort me as I mourn my beloved mother? As I was staring at my so-called husband, dumbfounded, the doorbell rang. When I went to answer it, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, still dressed in their morning clothes, barged in, saying, "Why, this place is huge. Why didn't you tell us about it?" You see, either my mother nor I had given my mother-in-law our new address. I assumed Jason would tell them, but it seemed he hadn't bothered, perhaps out of disinterest. As they walked around the house, eyeing everything greedily, they smirked at each other and said, "You've got spare rooms, right? We'll live here. You can leave." It seemed they were under the impression Jason bought the house. Jason, meanwhile, continued to relax on the couch with the cat, seemingly oblivious to everything. Looking up to the heavens, I thought it was all over, and then my mother-in-law, still hyped up, said, "The apartment we're living in now is so noisy. The landlord comes every day just because we're a bit behind on the rent." That's when I realized their frequent visits were to escape from their landlord. My sister-in-law grinned and said, "I'll take the upstairs south room." Madison always had a knack for choosing the good spots, didn't she? They saw my mother's death as an opportunity to shamelessly move themselves into my home. Naturally, I thought, I'll send these people packing to hell. Fine, I'll leave. Take care, then. As soon as I agreed, they nearly jumped for joy and said to Jason, Jason, we can live together again. You really can't manage without us, can you? Jason, perhaps too tired to care, lazily laughed and said, yeah, I'm off to bed, and retreated to his room. With spring in their step, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law told me, we'll be moving in on Tuesday in 2 weeks, so make sure you're out by then, and left. Next week, huh? I murmured, carefully placing my mother's memorial plaque, portrait, and ashes on the shelf, and whispered to her picture, watch over me, Mom, as if she was smiling back at me saying, give them hell. I promptly filled out the divorce papers I'd prepared earlier and rushed them to the courthouse, then started plotting my revenge. Come Monday, I was sitting at a cafe terrace with a view of the new house, hat pulled down over my eyes, waiting. There was a for sale sign by the new house's door plate. The autumn sky was clear, and as I was leisurely reading a book, a moving truck pulled up in front of the house, and out stepped Jason, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. I knew that Jason had been helping them move over the weekend. I had demurely asked him, please don't come back until the moving day. If I see you, I might get sentimental. They were perplexed by the for sale sign, but Jason nonchalantly suggested it might be a prank and tried to open the door with his key. Which of course didn't fit. I had changed the locks. Jason was frantically rattling the keys. Both my sister-in-law and mother-in-law looked on with anxious expressions. Frantically, he fiddled with the key as the movers looked on, ready to start.
What's the meaning of this for sale sign?
My sister-in-law and mother-in-law demanded, irritation rising in their voices. Jason, still seemingly unfazed, said, I'll just make a call, and that's when my phone vibrated. I ignored it. And as he couldn't get through to me, panic began to set in on his face. The two women looked on anxiously as they and Jason received frosty stares from the movers. Finally, he called someone else, the real estate agency listed on the sign. And there I was, sipping my coffee. Hello, I'm calling about a property in. Yes. It's being sold without my consent. Could you come over here, please? Jason began to explain on the phone when he was interrupted. It's already being sold by the owner? No, that can't be right. You want to sell it if I want to buy it? What are you talking about? Please hold on, and he hung up the phone. Then, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, with faces like furious demons, stormed up to Jason and demanded, hold on a minute. Isn't this the house you bought? No. I mean, it's not that I bought it, but isn't it considered joint property if you're married? Madison can't just sell it without consent, he retorted with surprising confidence, so I stepped in to deal with it myself. Surprised, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law turned to me and nearly snapped, what have you done with this house? I responded with a sly voice, what have I done? I sold it. It's my property, after all. Feel free to buy it if you want. Oh. I thought living here meant that kind of arrangement, playing dumb. Jason turned pale and started, hey, you can't just do whatever you, to which I shot back, what are you talking about? You haven't contributed a dime. And to talk about joint property when you haven't even contributed to living expenses since we got married. How dare you? For the first time in my life, I was yelling at someone out of anger. Jason was taken aback by the sudden resistance from a woman who used to be compliant to him. I continued to press Jason, you better give me back all the money I've given you. I'm ready with a lawyer, and shoved a business card and a claim for alimony in his face. I've always kept a household account book, so I had carefully calculated all the money I'd given to Jason. Though it was only a year and a half of marriage, the money I had handed over amounted to nearly $20,000. When Jason floundered, saying, that was supposed to be for our living expenses, wasn't it? You can't just claim that, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law also chimed in, exactly. What are you even saying? A housewife receiving living expenses is a given. Claiming that back is terrifying for an elite woman, to which I shouted back, shut up. Don't meddle in someone else's business. And you too have some nerve. It felt like something inside me had exploded. Both my sister-in-law and mother-in-law seemed overwhelmed by my outburst and began to tremble, holding each other. There was no way I was going to lose to these women who were always bad-mouthing others behind their backs. Jason started to back away, looking like he might run off at any moment. He was the type of man who'd run when things got tough. "No use in running," I said firmly. "I'm going to make sure you settle this properly." It seemed my resolve had an impact. Jason, too, collapsed just like my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, looking completely lost. The movers, looking troubled, said, "Where should we move the items to?" I replied, though it felt cruel, "I don't know. Ask them." Wondering where to move to when they don't even have a house, and I just smiled sweetly. What happened to them after they lost their place to go, I don't know. They probably rented a new apartment through some contacts of Jason. Jason had quit his job at a company soon after marrying me. He was scouted for a nightclub because of his playboy skills. Every night, he used the money from me like water, and while it seemed to go well at first, by the time I built our new house, he was scraping by. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law, unaware of such things, had come to depend on Jason's supposed financial strength based on the new house he had built and moved in as soon as my mother passed away. They used to say, "The beauty salon business is going well lately. We can support you, so you don't have to worry about anything." But in reality, the beauty salon managed by my mother-in-law had long since gone under. Swamped with debt and lacking real skill as hairdressers, they couldn't hold down jobs at any salon they went to. They had both been planning to rely on each other and ended up failing. Eventually, Jason got into trouble with some shady characters and disappeared. It was a fitting end for such a deadbeat man. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law are also missing, and I can't help but think they haven't exactly had the best lives. I couldn't get alimony from Jason, but I've come to see it as the cost of a life lesson. After the divorce, people have said I seem different, and somehow I've entered what you'd call my prime time for attracting others. It seems I used to be seen as serious and quiet, but now there's a certain settled confidence about me that has become attractive. I had been quite put off by the idea of marriage for a while, but as I started dining out with men more often, whenever the mood seemed to set right for something more, I'd excuse myself to go home because of my cats. Their reaction in such moments is quite telling of their character, so it's been a good strategy for sizing up men. In reality, I live in a pet-friendly apartment with my 2 cats. The other day, as I was sorting through my mother's belongings, I found a letter addressed to me. It was dated the month before she passed, right around when I'd settled into my new place. The letter was filled with various memories from my childhood through to my professional life, and it ended with her usual phrase, "To live in such a nice home, to lead such a good life, I've been blessed with a wonderful daughter. Thank you so much." I hugged that letter from my mother tightly and cried my eyes out for a while. Buying that new place definitely wasn't a waste, I've come to realize. From here on out, I'm committed to living positively and earnestly, keeping my mother's words close to my heart, and hoping to make someone feel as rewarded by me as I felt by her. Welcome home, Linda. The room was a mess, so I cleaned it up for you.
What? Why did you?
When I got home, not a single item was left in my room. I stood there, stunned, when my son's wife entered the room, laughing.
There's no need to be so shocked. I did it for the good of the house. What are you talking about?
Her laughter and actions, devoid of any remorse, were completely beyond my comprehension.
Where are my things?
Over there. Looking in the direction she was pointing, I saw flames rising in the yard. Then it hit me.
No way!
I ran outside barefoot to find my clothes and personal belongings being burned. What shocked me more was what I saw amidst the flames. A painting given to me by my late husband. Now it's nice and clean. Looking at my daughter-in-law, her face was controlled by malice. She was forgetting something far more important. Who was the one supporting this house?
Do you know what you've done?
Of course. No need to look so scared.
Don't joke with me.
Well,
There's still something left to do, isn't there? The smirk on her face made it clear. Are you trying to drive me out?
No.
I'm just exterminating a parasite.
Even with her changed words, I understood she was referring to me. And that's when I made a decision.
Then I'll leave.
And so, I left the house. But I was not alone in this. Everything was now in place. I swore on my late husband's grave that I would never forgive her. My revenge against my eldest son's wife had begun. My name is Linda Adams, and I'm turning 60 this year. Ever since I lost my beloved husband to cancer 2 years ago, I've been living alone. After he passed away, I felt a great void, but I'm finally getting used to living by myself again.
I'm sorry, but I'm counting on you to take care of things from now on. Sure, I know. There's one last thing from me to Linda, a gift. A gift? Yeah. It should be arriving at your house soon. Thanks for everything.
Those were my husband's last words. I reminisce about the times I had with him. He was a hardworking businessman at a well-known company. Our meeting came about through a mutual acquaintance, but we quickly hit it off and smoothly progressed to marriage. Since then, it has been nothing but bliss.
We've got our son now. I've got to work even harder. Yeah, but don't overdo it. I have a precious wife and son to look after.
At 28, I gave birth to our son, John, and 4 years later, our daughter, Emily, was born. I believe I worked hard every day as a homemaker, which was also my husband's wish. He acknowledged my efforts, and as a result, he left us more than enough savings and assets. However, even in such a life, changes occur. I'll be coming back home soon.
Isn't your work too hectic?
No, it's settled down now, so it's fine. And I know it's short notice, but I'm thinking of coming back next Saturday.
That's fine, I'll be home.
I was looking forward to seeing John, it had been a while. But I had forgotten something important. Then, on Saturday, I'm home.
Welcome back. You must be tired. Take it easy.
Hello, Linda, it's been a while. I had completely forgotten, but I was not fond of John's wife, Julie. She had been looking down on me and making snide remarks even before they married.
Welcome, Julie.
I offered Julie a strange smile. She seemed to catch on and gave a smirk grin.
We're planning to stay over tonight, so please take care of us. Stay over? I wasn't aware of that.
That's strange. I thought you'd been informed. Julie began to make herself comfortable as if it were her own home. It almost seemed as if she was testing how comfortable our house was. In the end, they stayed for 2 days, and it was a continuous strain on my heart. I thought that would usher in the return of peaceful daily life, but that was quickly about to change.
Mom? I need to talk to you about something.
It was about a week later. I had a bad feeling.
Actually, Julie has. Hold on a sec.
I took a deep breath.
Sorry, what about Julie?
Oh, right.
So, Julie wants to live with you. Live together?
It was totally unexpected. I asked for the reason.
I thought it was sudden too and wondered why, but it seems she's worried about you.
Worried? I couldn't help but wonder if that were true, why she hadn't reached out herself.
I told her you are fine, but she won't listen. I see. How are things between you and Julie then?
I think we're okay, but... He said they were fine, but he sounded less than enthusiastic. I thought it was bad to burden my son like this and made a suggestion.
Then I'll just tell Julie myself that she can't live with us. If I say it directly, she'll give up, right?
After hanging up, I looked up at the ceiling. Living with my daughter-in-law was out of the question. Her snooping around my house before must have been her scoping it out for moving in. With that in mind, I just couldn't accept her proposal.
Hello? Julie, about the living together thing.
I contacted her the next day. I wanted to settle things quickly before they got more complicated.
You heard from John, didn't you?
Her voice was clearly excited. She must have thought living together was a possibility.
I've heard the story. So, we can't live together.
Then there was a moment of silence. She must have been shaken.
Why not? As you get older. And wouldn't it be better for you to have someone around? Maybe so, but I'm fine on my own.
Don't say that. I'm really worried about you.
Your concern is appreciated, but...
All right. If that's what you want. It seemed she had accepted it for now. I thought now I could return to my peaceful daily life. Indeed, things seemed calm as usual for the next couple of weeks. But Julie hadn't given up yet. Hello there. One afternoon, she came over.
Julie. What are you doing here? I've come to talk about a proposal today. Can I come in for a sec?
Before getting an answer, she walked right into the house. Taking a seat on the couch as if it were her own, she began to speak.
How about we try living together for a bit? Excuse me? We live together on a trial basis, and then decide if we want to make it a permanent arrangement. If you don't like it, I'll move out.
I racked my brain desperately. A wrong decision now could lead to irrevocable consequences.
Does John know about this?
Oh, don't worry about that. Then she began to call my son. I waited for the phone call to end, pondering what to do next.
John says to talk to you.
Here you go.
Hello? John?
Mom, I'm really sorry. I had no idea Julie would go to you.
What are you gonna do?
I'm okay with living together. But don't get me wrong, I'm not agreeing with Julie's idea.
I just think it's a good way to get her to give up.
There was a certain logic to his thoughts. As he said, we could live together for a while and find the right time to say no.
All right, let's do that.
Deep down, I feared Julie might disrupt our home, but if things went south, she could just leave. And so, our living together began. At first, everything was peaceful. Things changed when John started spending more time away from home due to work.
Sorry, I'm too busy to help out around the house right now. Don't worry about it.
Instead, I'll take care of the expenses.
Don't fuss over it. Leave it to me.
Soon after, he left for a long business trip. And as if she had been waiting for him to leave, her attitude changed dramatically. Are you not so good at cooking? It was during one of our meals together.
What? Well, it just feels a bit dated and plain. Even dog food might be better.
She laughed mockingly, revealing her true colors. From then on, all pretense was dropped. Another day, as I was sorting out the laundry in the living room, she exclaimed, "Hey! Did you mix our laundry together again?"
It's not necessary to separate them.
She sighed heavily.
When you mix them, your old lady smell gets on my clothes. Please do mine separately next time. Oh, and rewash mine, will you? Hey, where do you think you're going? I've got plans with friends.
She never lifted a finger to help, preferring to gallivant about instead. I couldn't stand it any longer.
Your behavior lately has been too much. I'm gonna have to tell John about this.
I thought this would definitely calm things down. But she was not a woman to fold so easily.
Don't joke with me. I'm here out of the goodness of my heart.
What on earth was she talking about? Even though the arrival of Julie had completely disrupted our daily life.
If you go snitching, it won't end well for you.
With that, she threw a picture frame that was nearby at me. And it was a picture of my husband and me, no less. At that moment, I felt everything I had been holding back just overflow.
Such a thing. Okay, I'll be able to get back soon, Mom. We'll talk in detail then. All right, John.
3 months after we started living together, because of what had happened before, I talked to my son, including about ending the living arrangement. He didn't even seem surprised when I called and readily agreed. It was just 3 days before he was due to return. I'll be coming back soon, Mom.
Emily, something happened?
Well, our lives were about to change even further. My daughter, who had been married and living in another state, came back home.
Sorry for the suddenness. It's fine. But what happened?
As I listened to her, she revealed that her husband's infidelity had led to her divorce.
You can stay here for a while. You've been through a lot, after all. But there's a problem.
I explained the current situation to her.
So Julie is living with you. Right. John is going to be back from his business trip soon, so we will talk things over then.
I see. I'm the newbie here, but I'll help out as much as I can.
Thank you. It's reassuring to have you, Emily.
That night, when Julie arrived at home, she asked, "Hey, Emily? Why are you here?"
Well, a lot's happened. I'll be staying here for a while.
Okay. Julie and Emily hadn't met that often, but for some reason, Julie seemed to have taken a liking to my daughter. Perhaps because Emily is older, Julie thinks of her like a real sister. Maybe because of that, Julie seemed unusually well behaved when my daughter was around.
Seems like Julie is taken to you, so we might use that to our advantage.
Indeed. We must be careful not to let on what we're planning. The next day, my son returned. I'm home. As I went to greet him at the door, his wife pushed past me. You're in the way. I stumbled from her shove. Hey, isn't that a bit dangerous? Just act your age, will you? I mean, you're an old lady. How many times have I seen her laughing while looking at me? At this point, I'm truly astounded by what she wants to do.
What are you doing here, Mom?
Just lost in thought, that's all.
Emily came back, right? Haven't seen her since Dad's funeral. She'll probably be back soon.
Then, about an hour later, we had dinner with my daughter who had just come home. When it's just the two of us, my daughter complains, but even she can't in this situation. It's been a really long time since we had such a peaceful family meal. My son's wife seemed to be in a better mood and started drinking.
Julie, don't you think you're drinking too much?
I'm fine. This is nothing.
Is she not so good with alcohol? I don't think that's the case.
But my son's wife continued to pick on me, emboldened by the alcohol. Why don't you have a drink with us?
I'm not good with alcohol.
What? What are you talking about? You can't take my request? I couldn't help but sigh. That's enough, right? You're clearly drunk. I'm still okay.
I'm worried too.
If Emily says so. In the end, Julie was taken to her room by my daughter.
Looks like Julie's gone to sleep. If she's drunk and asleep, she won't be up for a while, so it should be fine.
Then, it's time for the main event. And so the three of us talked about Julie. We intended to tell her that we were going to dissolve the living arrangement anyway.
Are you okay with that, John? She is your wife, after all.
I have my share of the blame for letting things get out of hand.
But what's the right thing to do?
We were at our wits' end. No good ideas came to mind, and time just passed. Then, my daughter asked a question.
First off, why did Julie want to live with us in the first place?
Hearing that, I indeed wondered. I realized I had never asked her or my son for a clear reason.
John, don't you know anything?
Last time I asked, she said she was worried about Mom, but that's probably a lie.
Like, what if it's this house he's after? It's pretty big after all. That could be possible.
Even before and after moving in together, I felt like Julie was always sizing up everything in the house. So, how about this idea? Emily came to us with a suggestion. It was a proposal we hadn't even considered, and John and I looked at each other.
But it might be a burden on Mom.
After a bit of thought, I realized it might be a good way to break the current stalemate. Yeah. Since it's Emily's idea, why not go for it? What do you think, John?
I'm okay with it too.
And so, we each started to make our moves. Of course, this was a secret from John's wife. A week later, everything was ready. However, Since there was a chance of being turned down for any number of reasons if I talked about it alone, we decided to bring up the living arrangement issue again, all three of us together. And we decided to execute our plan in 2 days. The day before.
Julie, I'm sorry, but I'm going to head out for a bit.
When will you be back?
Well, I should be back by the evening.
Got it. She seemed unusually happy, but I didn't think much of it. Because by tomorrow, I'd be saying goodbye to this life. The only worry was leaving John's wife at home alone. But I was looking forward to catching up with a friend for the first time in a while and had completely forgotten about that.
I'm home.
I returned around 4 p.m., but I couldn't find John's wife. Then, unexpectedly, she came out of my room. Welcome back, Linda. It was dirty, so I cleaned it up for you.
Why are you coming out of my room?
You'll see if you look.
What? Why is this happening?
Nothing was left in my room. As I stood there in shock, John's wife entered the room, laughing. You don't need to be so surprised. I did it for the good of the house.
What are you talking about?
Her behavior and laughter, without a hint of remorse, were completely baffling.
Where are my things?
Over there. I followed where she pointed and saw flames in the yard. That's when it hit me.
No way!
I ran outside barefoot, and my clothes and belongings were being burned. Then, I saw something that truly shocked me. Among the flames was a painting, a gift from my late husband. This cleans everything up nicely. Looking at John's wife's face, I could see it was filled with hatred. She had forgotten something important. Who really supports this house?
Do you know what you've done?
Of course. Don't look at me like that, you're scaring me.
Stop joking around.
Well, there are still things we gotta do, right? My son's wife grinned at me.
Are you trying to kick me out?
No. I'm just dealing with a parasite. Despite the sugarcoating, I knew she was talking about me. And so I made a decision. Then I'll leave. I left the house. But it wasn't just me. Swearing on my late husband, I vowed revenge on my son's wife. Are you really okay with this? Julie had asked me that just before I left, but I didn't look at her. I could easily imagine the expression on her face. I called my son and daughter as I headed to my new place.
I'm moving to the new house today, a bit ahead of schedule.
Got it, I'll tell Emily.
Then I'll see you there.
When I arrived at the new house, I sat on the sofa. I felt a bit excited about starting a new life. About an hour later, John and Emily arrived.
I didn't expect such an amazing house. How did you manage to get a place like this? I asked a friend of your father's, and he said this house was vacant. It kind of resembles our old place too, so I made a quick decision.
We had a pleasant time, but soon, we all wore serious expressions.
For now, let's just give Julie the address. Given her nature, she'll definitely come by.
Then I'll take care of that.
Thanks.
After a while, I had dozens of messages and missed calls. We're ignoring these, right?
Yes.
We then waited for my eldest son's wife to grow impatient and visit. After spending a few days relaxing in the new place, someone visited us. Looking at the outside through the window, there Julie stood, looking exhausted.
She's here.
Time to greet her.
I'm kinda nervous. Don't worry, there are 3 of us.
I knew this was the moment of truth.
You came, Julie.
What's this all about, Linda? What do you mean?
Why are you living in such an amazing place?
Well, you're asking me why. Let's just go to the living room for now. So all the players were present. We faced each other in the living room.
I didn't know you had so much money, Linda.
Well, of course you didn't. I didn't tell you. From now on, we plan to live here together. Sorry for keeping it a secret. Suddenly, my son's wife's demeanor completely changed to a smile. Perhaps she thought she would be able to live in this house too.
Well, you could have said something sooner. Why were you keeping Mum, John? Mom told me not to say anything about it.
Like a surprise? Trying not to laugh was a struggle as I watched my son's wife, who had gotten the wrong end of the stick and was getting all excited. The first to break the news was Emily. Julie, I'm sorry, but it's just going to be us living here.
What?
Her eyes went wide as saucers.
Emily's right. There's no place for you in this house.
Why not?
You destroyed my most cherished memory.
That was because
you were the one who suggested living together, but I bet you really wanted to drive me out. What were you after, my house or money?
My son's wife looked down in silence. She must have hit the nail on the head. But why such a mansion? Did you ask John for this? This time, my son interjected.
You seem to be under some misconception, but since we've been living together, I haven't paid a cent for living expenses.
What?
Mom's been covering it all for us.
And yet you. My son's wife stood there as if frozen in disbelief. That's a lie.
It's not a lie. I didn't want to burden John, so I paid for everything. You wouldn't know that.
Then she started to smile at me ingratiatingly.
We got our wires crossed a bit, but there's still time to make it right.
Let's start over. She went on and on about how much better it would be for her to live with us. I, finding the situation absurdly funny, took her hand and smiled sweetly.
You're the parasite. Why don't you take a good look at yourself in the mirror?
John, say something. You're on my side, right?
I thought I was, but there's no excuse for this level of awfulness.
Don't be ridiculous. Why am I the one?
Just give it up. No matter how much you beg, this fact won't change.
But I
will never forgive you for what you did to me.
No one in the room was on my son's wife's side. Not even her husband. As I watched her face contort with despair, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders.
That's the deal, so you need to leave this house and that house too.
That house too?
Well, that house is in my name, and I can't let a stranger live there.
A stranger, you mean?
Sadly, that's the situation.
At that, my son's wife began to scream, throwing and smashing things around her. Call the cops!
John, stop her. Okay, I got it.
My daughter quickly phoned the police. Stop this rampage now. Hey, back off! The situation was finally brought under control when my son tackled and restrained the one causing chaos. In the end, my son's wife, Julie, was escorted away by the police, sandwiched between officers. She glared at us as she got into the squad car, but at this point, there was nothing we could do. I felt no sympathy, just a sense of serves you right. Above all, she was getting her just deserts for ruthlessly destroying the memories of my husband.
Were you shocked? But this is for the best, right? Yeah. Now we'll finally have peace. The rest is up to John. I've got it covered. After everything that's happened, I can't live with her anymore.
I have faith that he will handle things well.
Emily and I are here too. I'm counting on you.
Afterward, John and Julie got divorced. Of course, it wasn't an easy process. She cried and screamed during the discussions with the lawyers, trying to garner sympathy. Her demeanor was fierce, but my son dismissed it outright. I was present as well, and I was just astonished by her pitiful display. Cut it out, already. Please, keep out of this. It's your fault this is happening.
Stop blaming others. You brought this upon yourself.
That's right. Just stop it. No matter how much you beg, I'm not changing my mind.
That's the way it is.
I smiled, including all the times she had smiled in the past, to show I meant it. There's no need to hold back anymore. I really felt like applauding my son for choosing to divorce.
Complain all you want, but don't bother us. I wouldn't want to have anything else burned.
Since that day, Julie stopped complaining, and we finally had peace. I felt a slight easing of the guilt I had towards my husband. Turns out, Julie, now evicted and jobless, was hopping from one friend's house to another. Having become a housewife upon marrying my son, she had no employment. I'm curious to see what life has in store for her.
Is it okay for us to live here now? Indeed. I've said plenty to Julie, but
don't worry about it. You're welcome to stay as long as you like. The ashes may remain, but not all memories of my husband have disappeared. From now on, the three of us will walk towards a bright future together.